first webinar brought to you by Beden Associates LLC in collaboration with Budget ID. My name is Dr. Benjamin Akwe. It's Friday, July 5, 2024, 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Nairobi time, and 1 p.m. GMT in Ghana, where the program is actually hosted. Today's discussion topic is titled Kenya at the Crossroads, the death of Damocles and the implications of Swahili Spring of regional security. As we proceed into the program, we'll try to understand what the death of Damocles is. What normally is supposed to be the sword of Damocles. So why this time we have the death of Damocles? The discussion topic today is a part 2 of our previous programming, which deals with the challenges that African countries have to navigate in terms of investment in development projects and price their citizens have to pay in terms of bearing the brunt of the decisions of their government for debt accumulations and unemployment and the national security threat that these that pose to the African state. The discussion today is part of our programming on US 3D strategic objective. When we say 3Ds, we're talking about diplomacy, defense, and development towards Africa. In the past 9 months, we have discussed extensively diplomacy and defense. In our subsequent discussions, we are focusing our attention on development. Our analysis will be within the context of US government development strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa for advanced pandemic recovery and economic opportunity and the African Union agenda. I don't want to go into these aspects of it because we've been able to deal with that last week. Right. So for clarification purposes, all right, our discussion for Africa's development, debt, and youth unemployment, and how they pose a national security threat to African states were pre-programmed as we were waiting scheduling times with the IMF and the World Bank. So basically what I'm trying to say is that the issue, the case study that we are dealing with now, which is Kenya, right? Kenya just came up, but actually we have already pre-planned our programming on development and debt as far back as 4 weeks ago with the IMF and the World Bank. We're currently waiting for scheduling time with Victoria Kwakwa, who is the World Bank representative or director for East and Southern Africa. So we are already programming that. We are only waiting for her to give us a particular schedule. And unfortunately, the issue of Kenya came in. So we are using Kenya as a case study, right? So I just want you to understand that particular context. It's not that we are picking on Kenya. We've already pre-planned, and Kenya came as more or less a case study for us to use, right? But today we sit with our discussion within the context of a working paper of Kenya's debt crisis, research and published by Okwa Ichomi Campaign, a civil society platform committed towards working with citizens to resolve Kenya's public debt crisis, which was published in December 2020. Now, I want to read to you the introductory part of their report. Now, the introductory part says the African continent is facing a substantial and rising public debt challenge. The number of African countries rated by the IMF as public debt distress or at high risk of distress doubled from 8 to 16 between 2015 and 2018. What's worse, this deeply worrying decline took place before COVID-19 pandemic hit. The unprecedented health and economic crises that are unfolding today as a result of COVID-19 will increase debt spending demands for healthcare and social safety nets, a depressed revenue raising, and drive the continent deeper into unsustainable debt. So I want our panelists to take these things into consideration. Africa between 2015 and 2018 was going through its own debt situations. Then we have COVID coming in, which put a lot of pressure on revenue for healthcare and other issues. So that means there's going to be more stress on the states, right, in terms of financing certain projects that have to deal with debt, thereby compounding the debt situation for African countries. We are already seeing a severe economic slowdown, falling commodity prices, a drying up of funding, and economic growth expected to drop price significantly and for some time. Africa will also be affected by disrupted supply chains and the effects of the pandemic on its economic partners, China, Europe, and the United States of Africa, which we've seen it between 2020 all the way now. Okay, so to our listeners and viewers on the social media platforms around the world, the Sankoff African webinars are anchored on a myriad of perspectives. So there may be differences of opinions from our guests, right, based on their expertise, knowledge, and experiences. I'm just trying to put this thing out over there. The differences in opinions does not necessarily mean perspectives and thoughts shared are wrong, but reflect a divergence of ideas to address security challenges facing the African continent. So I'm just trying to put this in accord that there may be differences in opinions. It doesn't mean this person is right and this person is wrong, but it's based on their expertise. We expect them to have independent thought. So you might belong to a particular institution, but you might not necessarily speak for that particular institution. But you might also be a part of a government where we will ask you to speak on the record in terms of government position on a particular policy, right? So these are some of the nuances I want you to take into consideration. So today we are honored to be joined by an expert from academia, a UDA party representative. UDA is the party in government, who will be speaking on record, and two other social and political activists, right? So joining us today, we have Dr. Stephen Nyaramba, who's a lecturer of applied economics. His research areas are international finance, public policy, and macroeconomic policy effect at Kenyatta University in Nairobi, Kenya. We also have Mr. Maliba Anot. Is it Naji? Am I correct? Did I pronounce it well?
It's Nyajai.
Nagai, who's a strategic communication advisor for the UAD party. So you will be speaking on record, because I quite remember I did send you a chart to try to differentiate your position, because being a member of a party or speaking for a party may be different from speaking from the government. But you gave me that clarification that you speak also for the government. So therefore, you have to speak on record on some of the questions that I may be asking you, not for the party. All right, so just take note of that. Then we have what Miss Aduma Wikista, right, who will be joining us later. I don't know if she'll be ready by now. It's 9 a.m. And currently she is based in Washington, D.C. She's a coordinator in Youth Serving Organization Consortium. She's currently in Washington, D.C. And lastly, we have Miss Damaris Mabia. Am I correct with that pronunciation?
Yes, Prof, you are. Thank you.
Sure. So she's the founder of Aminia Data Innovations, which is based in Nairobi, Kenya. Right. So at this point, I would like us to welcome the opening remarks, right, from our panelists. Now, when you are giving us your opening remarks, I want you to take into consideration, right, statements made by members of parliament, right, who are wearing T-shirts with the inscription, "I'm sorry." Either they are saying it on the platform, on the floor of parliament, that "I'm sorry," or they have T-shirts with the inscription, what? "I'm sorry." I want you to give us your opening remarks within that context. Feel free to say as to what they are sorry for, whether sorry is a policy that they will be embarking on, or they are going to translate that sorry into actionable policy. So your opening remarks should also take into consideration what that "I'm sorry" actually mean to the Kenyan people. So let's start with Mr. Andrew Maliba. Since you speak for the government, we have members of parliament, right, who mostly are coming from your party, saying "I'm sorry," or having T-shirt with the inscription "I'm sorry." Can you situate your opening remarks within that sorry?
Thank you very much for the floor. It's evening here. Good evening, guys in East Africa. Good morning, those in the West. It's quite a difficult place to begin this conversation, but I'll try. And even though it's serious, I begin with humor. We in the East are humorous people, even in difficult moments. So there's been a joke, of course, going around that our members of parliament, the Kenya members of parliament, are now not walking alone when they are doing business in town. They are walking in pairs or threes, like police officers. You know, ordinarily, no police officer does patrol alone. So the members of parliament are also walking, or rather moving around in pairs just for security, because there is disciplinary, there's an oversight that is going on courtesy of the Gen Zs. But be that as it is, it speaks to very deep things. First of all, the Constitution 2010 that we gave ourselves as a country gives Kenyans a framework of governance that is participatory, as in the role of citizens does not just stop at the voting level. There is the public participation cycle, and at different stages, the people can intervene, can better the process of governance. So it's not a rule versus the rulers versus ruled, or the leaders versus the led. It's a participatory process. It's a shared process when it comes to governance. And what we've seen in the recent week, it's, for me, enhanced, a vibrant to that particular provision or desire as stated out in the Constitution. People going out to the street, of course, and airing out their opinions, shaping policy. The methods might not be really palatable for other people, but then this is who we are as Kenyans. We a little bit sometimes, it could be too noisy around here. You might think the house is collapsing, but that is who we are. Our democracy is a little bit noisy, but if you can actually check back, we as a country have had times when we have been on what the world would consider a brink, but we always pull back. So this is who we are. There's that level and streak of resilience. So when you see members of parliament putting on T-shirts saying, I am sorry, others doing letters, elaborate letters, and putting them on social media, others going on the floor of the house, others have done videos and come out, others have gone to meetings and apologized. And of course, there is still a group of them who have said they don't regret what they did, their conscience is clear. Part and parcel of us having a conversation. Dialogues are difficult. Talking is difficult. And that is where a lot of people fight. The reason why human beings across history have found it easier to fight is because talking is difficult. Dialogue looks easy on paper until you try to do it, especially when it comes to governance. So as for me, I look at it from a place where we are testing the Constitution, we are testing the Bill of Rights, and the people are picking their position when it comes to this, to how you engage. Permit me to just walk you back. That largely, whereas the Gen Z banner was the auspices under which these demonstrations were mobilized,
right?
of course,
I'll get into the conversation, right? Just hold on to that. I just want a brief remark in terms of that story, right? So I'll get back to you. So let me go to
okay. So right? We'll get to the substance of this.
Go ahead. All right, let me come to you, Mbeya, right? So like I said, I want you to frame your opening remarks within the inscription, I am sorry, all right? I don't know what exactly they mean by that, but you being a Gen Z, I want you to just situate your opening remarks within that context. It's just an opening remark, so just a few seconds.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. So from how I view it, it's that aspect of saying, I am sorry, not because you're genuinely sorry, but because you got caught. You know, I'm sorry I got caught in this. Other than that, if you weren't caught, you probably wouldn't be sorry. That is the vibe that I feel from these members of parliament who are coming out to apologize. I have not seen a legitimate apology in terms of content, not content, because that would mean the member of parliament actually stating specific clauses that motivated them to actually vote yes for the bill. Like, can you actually back up your vote, whether it was a yes or no, and substantively stand for it, regardless of the status of your conscience? That did not come out in the apology. So feels like a half-baked apology, feels like an apology that speaks more to the fact that now they're trying to protect themselves, they're trying to look good in part of the public. Now there's so much rage, and even 16-year-olds are talking about the finance bill, trying to understand what is VAT and excise duty, as Dr. Jaramba would come in shortly to just tell us how he's participation has been on that as well. So for me, I just question, these members of parliament, did they actually read the bill for themselves? Or is it a scenario whereby you have lots of advisors in your office, then they come up with statements that are guidance documents, and then that now motivates your vote? What's the source of their voting power? Is it kickbacks? Is it them actually taking initiative as representatives of the people and taking their stand to understand what they're voting for? Anything that requires their vote, do they value the voice of their vote? Members of parliament are supposed to represent the people. And so the seriousness of the vote should not be reduced to, voting along party lines, or voting and then, after some time, you're sorry, then drafting a very beautiful, love letter to the public. I mean, those are theatrics, in my opinion, which they should do better than that. I would request them that they can stand to a higher ground of responsibility, and in this case, moral responsibility. Hold yourself to higher regard, so that you understand you are the voice of the voiceless in parliament. So any decision that you make, it's affecting. We're not playing poker here. So that, for me, the story, it didn't cut. Thank you.
Thank you very much, right? Thank you so much. And let's go to Dr. Nyaramba, right? Briefly, right? Like I said, I've been watching the news and listening to Citizen TV, and I'm seeing this. So briefly, put your opening remark within that context of "I'm sorry."
Yes, Prof. Good afternoon and good morning, and also for some of us who are in here in East Africa, good evening. It's good to be here and to be part of this discussion. Now, for my opening remarks, I would actually say that in the context of what has happened in Kenya, that has also led for our members of parliament to give an apology. This is something that has been cooking. I think the only thing that we've not had anybody to serve what has been cooking. And we thank the young generation, they've done it. The point at which Kenya clamored for the new constitution was to change and move away from what we already are experiencing as a country. And one of the power that was given and which is main is that of observing, which I would actually call the oversight role, and the role of budgeting that was given to our parliament. Now, the only thing and the spirit of the constitution was to make sure that the parliament was independent enough to oversight especially the executive, and do an informed debate, especially when it comes to matters of budgeting and financing. And that's why Kenyan gave them that role. And every time we do go for election, the hope that will be delivered by members of parliament. Unfortunately, that has not been happening. And the country, in fact, I wouldn't say the young generation. The young generation just got a good backing from the majority of Kenyans, and they had enough courage to do that. It is the first time we've had a movement that has no party backing, no political party backing, no tribe backing, no religion backing, but it is a Kenyan movement. Is that Kenyan were tired because members of parliament from our side, they were not doing their role. And therefore, because of fear, probably what would happen thereafter, maybe they are sorry verbally, but in terms of accompanying the sorry, we are still watching how it will be implemented, especially when it comes to the substantive debate and informed policy moving forward.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you so very much. I'm from West Africa, so I'm beginning to understand the way things are done in Eastern Africa. So let's go back into our conversation today. Now, what we do at Sankofa, we use what you call narratives, right? We know narratives are part of African societies, right? Now, when we use narratives over here, narratives are based on research, or they are based on realities happening in various African countries, or they are based on government policy. So it's not about coming here to do politics. Anything that we say in terms of narratives are based on research. So I'll give you maybe a research done by this person, or a policy position that the government has espoused, or maybe a reality that is happening in Kenya itself. So we don't do politics over here. I just want to put this in our across. Now, the first narrative is on Kenya's debt trap, right? So I'm going to read and show you a data. A study by the Okwa Uchemba campaign, a civil society platform committed towards working with citizens to resolve Kenya's public debt crisis, published by the Institute for Social Accountability in 2021, found out that Kenya is increasingly getting into a debt trap to persistent fiscal deficits, driven by growth in foreign borrowing and expanding imports. With constrained access to concessional loans, commercial debt is being used to support government budgets and finance infrastructure projects. The country is equally running a current account deficit that is mainly financed by capital inflows from borrowings. This is some of what they said. Now, I sent you a graph, right, which maybe my team, my co-hosting team will put on the screen. From June 2013 to February 2021, which shows an increase, a sustained increase, right, in Kenya's debt from 2013 all the way to February 2021. In June 2013, if you compare external debt to domestic debt, right? External debt was lower than domestic debt. In June 2014, domestic debt was bigger than external debt. In 2015 of June, both external debt and domestic debt were equal. June 2016, they were all equal. June 2017, external debt far outweighed, started increasing more than domestic debt. In June 2018, the same thing. June 2019, the same thing. June 2020, same thing. So there has been a gradual increase where you see that what? External debt, which is borrowing, is outweighing domestic debt. And you could see that it's showing debt to GDP ratio, right? So let me come to you, Dr. Nyaramba, right? Given your research expertise as an international finance, public policy, and microeconomic effect analyst, right? Can you explain to our audience why Kenya is in a debt trap due to deficits driven by growth in foreign borrowing and expanding exports? We want you to explain that as the cause of what is happening on the graph, so that we could set the stage for our conversation, because this thing has been happening since 2013. So can you explain to that what is contributing to this increase in debt?
Thank you, Prof. And I'm happy that you are presenting the work I did. I actually did this work on behalf of Ukwa Ushumi. So this table, in fact, I'm also looking at it from another point here in my room. So thank you for that. Your question, one, I think Kenya, like also a number of developing countries, we can confidently say that we are in.
Okay, hold on. Nancy, can you take off the graph now? Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Doc.
Yes, I can actually comfortably, and of course with justification, with evidence, say that Kenya, like a number of Africa countries and also developing countries, we are already caught up in what we may call the debt trap. We are in debt trap because we cannot ignore it at the moment. We cannot do anything without talking about the debt that we owe. And I wanted, of course, that document you're referring to, the one from Okoa Ushumi refers to, that the main problem that we encounter is that of the foreign debt. It's not the domestic debt. And in fact, maybe just a point to note is that it has never and it cannot be an issue once we are talking about domestic debt. It can't. And that's why you find that even developed countries, despite the fact that they have huge debts, they don't experience the problems that we are experiencing, because the currency that they use is normally their own currency. And therefore, in the context of the debt that they have, we can actually call that a stabilization policy. They are normally an aspect of a tool to manage the money supply and money demand. So you realize that a domestic currency to a domestic market is simply a note from the central bank that I owe you. Now, it becomes a problem once it is now crossing the border, because now a country behaves like an individual that depends on borrowing in order to consume, not even to invest, to consume. So Kenya, we found ourselves in a situation where we constantly have to borrow from a foreign market, not even to nowadays, not even to consume, not to invest, but now even to repay the debts that we acquired earlier on. So in that case, we would say we cannot even manage to pay the foreign debt that we already have acquired without incurring a more expensive debt in order to repay that. In that case, then you'll find that that trap is there. And how did we find ourselves in such a situation that we have to depend on foreign borrowing? A foreign borrowing, I would actually put it in a simple analogy. I don't know, you know where we are, we have some food we call githeri. You know,
yeah.
I'm sure you may not have encountered that. It's maize and beans. So now you know, when you want in a family setup, you'd want to cook and feed on githeri. You have maize at your home, or your household. You have beans in the household. You have firewood. The only thing you'd probably be missing is the matchbox to light the fire and then go ahead and cook your githeri. So we found ourselves in such a situation. We have the maize, we have the beans, we have the firewood, even the kitchen is set up. The only thing that we are missing is that matchbox to light the fire. Now, instead of borrowing, probably just for purposes of matchbox, we discard our maize, we discard our beans, we discard our kitchen, we even discard our our firewood to waste, and borrow the entire githeri in order to eat. So consequently, I'm trying to summarize
I'll come back to the details. So just do the summary. I'll come back to you again for the details.
Yeah. So what now has happened is that we found ourselves with a lot of unutilized capital, factors of production domestically, including labor, such that now we have to export labor. We are almost donating labor for free to other markets because we have excess, instead of looking at it as part of factors of production, instead of using it or using even combining our labor with other factors of production to realize output. We are therefore relying fully in import. So we borrow, and the reason why you would borrow, not because you don't have the capacity most of the time, is because you're borrowing in order to have the goods already produced in another market and imported to you. And that's the reason you find that the only purpose, because if you even borrow dollars and you come in Kenya, you can't spread that until you convert it into Kenya shillings. So it is only at a point where you need to import that then you need the foreign currency. So that element, and of course I'm saying it has not only affected Kenya, and it is heavily supported by IMF. It is one of the factors that has brought us to where we are, that we have to do foreign borrowing, not to stabilize our market, but simply to continue consuming and relying on foreign produced goods and services.
All right, Doc, let's pause over there. You've given us a summary of it. I'll come back to you again for you to give us the details. But let me go to Arnold, right? I want to find out from you whether the president, we can all agree that there's a debt trap based on what Prof has just submitted to us. He's giving a summary that Kenya finds itself in some sort of debt crisis. Now, I want us to try to understand the president in terms of what he believes or whether he's in denial that we find ourselves in a debt trap. Now, on June 26th, he, in his address to the nation, right, I have a transcript of some of the things that he said. I want us to look at points 3 and point 5. So, Nancy, can you put on some of the transcript that I sent to you? Show us from point 3 to point 5. I'm going to read for Anna to respond to that. Hello?
That's it, sir. We are doing it.
All right, so whilst they are putting it up over the Arnold, let me just read it over here, right? It said, the president saying, this was June 26, 2024, statement by His Excellency William Ruto, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Kenyan Defense Force on the Finance Bill 2024, right? I'm reading point 3 to point 5. We have made significant progress in pulling the nation back from the brink of debt distress. Our debt situation is better managed, and our budget now has space for investment in programs aimed at easing the hardships on vulnerable people and creating opportunities for the youth. Then he goes on to say, right, our GDP grew by 5.6 in 2023, ranking Kenya among the 27 fastest growing economies in the world. Our inflation figures have fallen from 8% in May 2023 to 5% in April this year. Out of every 100 shillings, we've been spending 60 shillings in debt service, right? He's using the word debt service in terms of the interest, not the principal, right? We have paid Kenya's Eurobond debt of 2 billion shillings incurred in 2024. Today, Kenya's debt burden is much less, more sustainable, and we are on course to redeem our country from the discomfort of debt and assert our sovereignty. So these were the things that he said. Now, just a day or two ago, right? These are some of the things that he is advocating for during the withdrawal of the finance bill. He's saying that it's going to have some impact on the budget. Now he's saying that 47 state corporations with overlapping and duplicating functions are supposed to be dissolved and advisors to be reduced by 50% with immediate effect. Is he actually in denial, right? Based on what he said in his speech, right, on the 26th, and now he's admitting changes and withdrawal of the finance bill. Is he in denial that Kenya is actually in a debt trap?
There were instances where I lost a little bit of you, but I think I can try to trick it backwards and probably reconstruct. But to be very clear, no one in this country, not even the president, is in denial that as a country, we are in a bad debt situation. When he came to office, the first year, we are talking about 20 months since the Kenya Kwanza administration came to power, that the issue of the national debt management actually has been at the top. It's almost central to all national conversations when you're talking about the national economy. We've actually had the issue of debt distress at the center of it. At some point in the last financial year, it was almost certain that Kenya was going to default, and therefore it was all out there. Unfortunately, allow me to just say that we saw this coming. If you look at articles done
All right. Seems like
I've lost
are you there?
I've lost Arnold there.
Arnold, are you there? Can you hear us? All right.
in newspapers by economists, even by journalists 5-7 years ago. I lost out my internet. I don't know whether
we'll come back to the issue of the internet, right? So go ahead.
I'm back. So I was saying the president is not in denial that we are actually in a debt situation that other people would love to characterize as a debt trap. Just to give you a little bit of figures to see where we are today. That in the last financial year, we were able to collect about 2.3 trillion Kenya shillings. And now look at the overall budget. You need just the salaries and emoluments for public service take about 47% of ordinary revenue. That goes to about 1.1 trillion shillings. It's about 1.136 trillion shillings. Then we have got money that we are giving to devolved units. We call them counties here. We have got something that is, for purposes of explaining, it's a pseudo federal system of sorts. Even though we are still we are running a centralized administration. So you are giving them about 400 billion shillings. Then using the numbers that we are using, out of 100 shillings, we are using 60 shillings to service debt. You are then using that, again, using the 2.3 as a mark, you're talking about 1.3 trillion shillings, almost 1.3 trillion shillings going to debt management. And then we have got a development budget of about 700 billion. Already you've breached the 3.9 trillion and going up. So then we end up with a huge fiscal deficit. So with that debt, you then are forced again to further go out and borrow, even though you are already struggling to pay existing loans. But there's a little bit of a problem here that we are not willing to talk about. When we speak about, for us as Kenyans, this issue, it's so much about the Constitution. Once you start speaking about relooking at the Constitution, people become a little bit jittery, but this is it. In the year 2010, we adopted a new constitution that gave us a new framework of governance. For the last 10 years that we've had President Uhuru Kenyatta govern us, he was the first person to actually administer that constitution fully. We have got a new way of governing ourselves, including coming up with 47 governments. If you add on the national government, we have got 48 governments that have got a little bit of, each government has got an executive and it has got a legislature of its own. We only share the judiciary. And there's so many other things that we give to ourselves. That structure is expensive.
Hold on, Arnold. Now, I'm asking my question within this context. I want to get back to what I said. You said what? Today, Kenya's debt burden is much less, more sustainable, and we are on course to redeem our country from the discomfort of debt and assert our sovereignty. Is that a president who is not in denial?
No.
This statement say that you are doing well. But that is not a true reflection of the Kenyan economy.
It doesn't say that we are doing well. It says that we are not where we want to be, but we are not where we will have to be. There is a place we wanted to be, but we are not where we used to be. That's why he says that the burden is much lighter. That is not denial. He further goes and qualifies that we will be redeeming ourselves, that it's much more sustainable at this particular level. You know, if you had a sick person who is in coma, I love to use this example, that we had a patient in coma. That patient has come out of coma and now he's in the general ward. That is progress. We don't say that we entirely are out of hospital. When we should be saying that we are doing fine is when the patient has recuperated and has gone home. He says we've not gone home yet, but we are not in coma. We are now in the general ward. It's a little bit manageable when he uses the word sustainable. So that is not denial. He's simply trying to give...
How does the withdrawal of the finance bill, right, complicate the already vulnerable situation?
The impact of withdrawing the finance bill is actually going to be felt in the days to come, because largely the people who had done the finance bill had looked at it from the technical perspective with the background of the economic situation we are in. There are, of course, the social factors that then, of course, speak to it, and the political aspect to governance. You know, planners everywhere must remember, whether you're doing urban planning, economic planning, whatever planning you're doing, planners, wherever they are, they must always remember that planning is not a technical job, but a political job. That is one reminder we have to keep on reminding even economists, that the work they do, once you sit down to plan, it is a political job and not a technical job. So the finance bill was largely, in my opinion, a technical approach to a problem we had. Now, with the withdrawal, first of all, there are political consequences. You can see that 3 counties, those are devolved governments, have also withdrawn their finance bills at county level. There's a precedent set there. So governance is going to be a little bit difficult. Secondly, we had obligations. You know, the first charge on our national account is normally the sovereign debt. Once we receive money, the first charge on a particular account, we first of all pay the due debt available, and then with what is left, then we can administer the public goods and then check out other tax expenses that come with that. So it's definitely going to complicate our approach to easing the debt distress. One of those things we actually need to have is a sober conversation as a nation, because the easier part is withdrawing. The easier part is dealing with managing the chaos that have come with it. The technical part of it, because I normally love to give this, I'm traditionally, or rather I am originally a public policy person. And I like to equate an economy with a brain. Even if you are operating on a patient and you denied the brain oxygen, even for a millisecond, the brain will, once it comes back and boosts, it will actually go back there and there will be consequences. The same thing happens to an economy. You can't cheat an economy. So what has happened here, of course, for political and social reasons, of course, you can actually even qualify it and call it economic reasons. We are at a place where we have to rethink our economic planning architecture. And that definitely speaks to the elephant in the room, which is the debt distress. So it's definitely going to actually call for much more than political rhetoric. It's going to call for much more than demos. Actually, the real impact for the demos and whatever has happened is just about to be felt. And that will start with how we manage the national debts. So it's not going away.
Thank you very much. So we are setting the stage. We are trying to understand the problems, right, that most African countries, in this case, Kenya, is dealing with. Now let's come back to Mbaya, right? She and the Gen Z have been on the street for a while now, making so much demands on the government. I normally don't use the word government. I prefer to use the word the state. That's the state does certain things. Now, what I want to know from Mbaya is that have they taken into consideration whether the state or the government has the capacity and the capability to meet their demands? Because historically, the African state role has been changing over the years or over decades, right? They are making demands on the state. Have they taken into consideration the ability and the capability of the state to do those things for them. Now, at this point, the African state is more or less a developmental state. It's supposed to provide development compared to what we have in the West. The West has to deal with legal issues, right? The African state is supposed to be embarking on development. It started initially from being a liberation state, fighting the colonial powers. Then in the 1970s, 60s, around that place, it has to set itself into governance. So it changed itself from a liberation state, entering into government, then it had to go into what? Development, is fighting terrorism. So the African state and its nature keep changing all the time. It is called upon to do so many things that states in the West do not do. So what I want to find out from there is that when they are making their demands on the government or on the state, do they take these things into consideration before they make their demands?
Yes. Thank you so much, Prof. Very, very good question right there. And precisely that is what has pushed us from online to the streets. Yeah. I'd want to start my commentary based on the question you asked on the debt trap. So there, as rightfully mentioned, the high debt servicing costs and, of course, the presence of illegal financial flows have a retrogressive impact on the most vulnerable of the populations and the demographic, which is the youth and the women and, of course, PWDs. So there, it just shows you the unsustainability of debt and its policy and poor policies, how they affect all these people. And worse, the fact that our president is on record saying that he has been moving, doing shuttle diplomacy all over the world, trying to get jobs for the youth. So for me, that's really heartbreaking. And I can't even describe how painful it is to hear our president say those words, that he believes the best option for the youth is to outsource us to elsewhere. I mean, how else then do you explain brain drain? Yeah. So it's really painful, and it just shows you the nexus of debt and taxes, and how any conversation, including having the youth and brain drain as collateral, whatever it takes to get.
Don't you think the president is making that statement within the context of the challenge it is facing? So it has to change its nature. Don't you think that instead of focusing on providing jobs which are not available and the resources are not available, it has to change its nature to look at other alternatives, to say, let's export those youth that we have that we cannot accommodate. Is it part of the state changing its nature to adjust to the challenges that it's facing internally?
Okay. So I think there I have to put it on record also as well, that what happens with a population that have constantly flagged you, making failed promises. We currently have a tool that has been developed to track the Kenya Kwanza promises that this government made, that they will implement, and especially on the youth, which Mr. Maliba himself falls in that bracket as a youth. Very recently, he was in the space. And so for him, he really has more on his desk to ensure that this specific ruling party delivers and actually meets its mandate and the promises that it made to the youth. So I'd want to mention two. One is that toolkit for the Kenya Kwanza promises, the ruling party. Then the second one is on the corruption, and it highlights the corrupt state officers. If you look at the budgetary allocations, it just shows you the priorities of the government. So yes, as much as the president would want to look at it as a strategy to combat debt servicing and also be creative and strategic about it, money is emotive. There is no way you're going to have youths watching public, wastage of public resources, illegal entities operating with huge budgetary allocations. And then you tell us that the same cannot be allocated towards technical and polytechnics that can even, work in the remote areas in Kenya. So the conversation then turns that, you're being crafty about it. I can mention one county, Uasin County, where the president, that is his home county actually, there was a huge scandal about youth who had been promised to, go abroad as a means to better their education. And it turned out to be a scam. Parents lost lots of money. Parents lost lots of money in that. And it became a huge scandal that even the governor, the former governor of Uasin County, had to sit and have a conversation about it. So, the aspect of, good policies, good suggestions by the president, some that could even be very populist in nature, are met by a population and, the youth who are looking through it and they're like, no way. We saw what happened to Uasin Gishu. We saw how that ended. We have seen how so many Kenyan youths have lost their lives in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, with no clear, statements from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in terms of what they're doing to protect workers, especially those who are working abroad in the diaspora. They're dying in very dire circumstances, some unexplainable. The embassy cannot even track and bring them home. So these are conversations that, as we speak on means and ways that we can reduce the debt trap, on the other side, the wage bill keeps stretching, So, of course, there's going to be mistrust.
Okay, so you are confirming what I'm saying to the effect that we have a developmental state. Now you're talking about the state changing its position to do other things, which Western states do not do, right? Western states are not developmental states. They do not have to do roads because don't forget, they were developed before they became a democracy. The problem we have in Africa is that we are not developed, but we are being forced to adopt democracy. And when you adopt democracy, there is so much demands on the state. And the question of the state have the capability and the capacity to do that. You have to take that into consideration. Western states were developed before they became a democracy. African states are now put to become a democracy before they develop, which put a lot of stress on the state. So let's work on that thought. Let's go to Dr. Nyaremba again. So we talked about the deficit. It's talking about expanding import. What is contributing to this? What sort of goods are we importing? And we know that in the 70s and the 80s, we tried to do import substitution industry to reduce our import of foreign goods, right? So what is causing Kenya to be importing more goods from the West in terms of trying to have industries which will be able to produce these goods internally?
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. And of course, I think I really like the conversation, especially from the two speakers. And maybe just a point to tell you is that we've solved the problem that was to befall us this June. This June we were to pay $2 billion US dollars in form of Eurobond, which we have. I was just looking at a calculation. The amount that we have borrowed within this year, plus that of concession alone, and I've seen it's almost coming to 2.5 billion US dollar. After having paid two, we have already acquired an extra. And don't forget that this one is it's more expensive in a short period. So I wanted to say what we've actually solved is a point problem. Is not a long-term problem. We have a point solution to the issue that was to befall us, maybe, and that risk of defaulting. Now, to the question you are asking, I want to talk about this aspect of deficit and the issue of import. A deficit is simply the question of expenditure bad manners. I think that is so clear that even in Kenya, as much as I agree with Arnold, but you can tell that it has taken the demonstration to put some of obvious bad manners that were in the budget. You know, it is clear. It didn't have to take our young generation demonstrating and others dying to actually realize that some of the expenditure was simply wastage. Now, why do we import? And this is a question that already addressed in the document you have referred to. One thing that you realize is that some of the Asian countries, including China, at one point they were in where we are as Africa. They were having debt issues, and one point that they realized is that the currency issue is a problem. The currency issue. How do you get to subsidize foreign goods at the cost of your domestic good? It happens the moment you hold your currency at a very strong position. And I'll tell you that the issue of the currency being strong is not about the amount. Like, for example, we know that if you go to Nigeria, that it is about 1,500 naira per dollar. But it can still be that the naira is more strong, or we can say it is overvalued given the value of the dollar, because we look at the goods. Now, in Kenya, in particular, we have a situation where we do not want our currency to depreciate. And mainly, we are able to cry, and our cries is hard because it hits on the most of what we may call the intermediate goods that are actually imported for further maybe usage in production. But you find that in the same category of goods, there is heavy taxation attached to them. Now, and I then look at how China and some of the Asian countries were able to deal with the problem of imports. In fact, majority of them, China even now, and I think that as a point, they developed a conflict with the United States, is that element of devaluing their currency. They devalued their currency to a point that the goods that were coming from out of the country were very expensive. And they made sure that those goods that were important and needed to be imported either are subsidized or no tax is attached to them. So the problem we are having as Africa, because it's not only a problem of Kenya, is that element of wanting our currency to be strong against US dollar. And at that, what happens is that we deliver a proper subsidization into foreign producers at the cost of our production. And that's what has made us realize that even the fact that we have the same type of hen laying the same type of egg here in Kenya and another one in China, a China one will deliver, will give an egg. That egg will be handled, it will be transported to Kenya, and it finds itself cheaper than that is produced in Kenya because you've already subsidized. Now, the only problem is that you've not subsidized using your own currency. You've damaged your domestic production, and again, you have borrowed to give those producers in a foreign economy the currency which you desperately require. And that's what I would actually want to say. Our major problem as Africa is that element of wanting to put our currency strong, and therefore we are demanded and we are required, of course, as conditions almost to all Africa countries, to maintain what we call the foreign reserves, so that anytime your currency seems to get strong or weak, then there is an intervention by the central banks in order to maintain domestic currency strong and overvalued given the value of the goods in question. And therefore, you find that imports are continuously becoming cheaper, available into domestic, into Africa. And therefore, Africa has become more of a consuming continent. While, of course, our big brothers have become a producing continent. So they have the jobs, they have the income. As we consume, the problem is that we don't get the income that we require in order to continuously purchase the goods and services. We have to, again, continuously depend on the borrowing. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. I'll come back to you again, right? Now, let me go to Arnold, right? In my initial submission to Mbaya, right, in terms of the changing nature of the African state, I mentioned the fact that African states are now called upon to fight terrorism. So that means from development, they keep changing over the years, right? So one of them is being asked to fight terrorism now. Now, based on that, when you listen to the president's speech on June 26th, he used the word criminals terrorizing Kenyans. He used the word criminals terrorizing Kenyans. Now, I listened to a conversation that he granted, an interview that he granted to Citizen TV Kenya, right? Where he said they had prior information, right? The national security had prior information in terms of those who will be coming to demonstrate. So they have a pretty much good idea about those who are coming to demonstrate. Now, using the word criminals terrorizing what? Kenyans raise the issue of terrorism. Now, what I want to find out from you, right? Now, the government actually campaigned on being digitally transformative, right? Then it said, well, the government it took measure to contain the protest after infiltration by criminals, right? What I want to find out from you is the government using the surveillance counter law to actually spy on Kenyans. Because if you look at the demonstration, you will see people in uniforms or soldiers going into the protesters to pick up certain persons within the protesters, youth protesters. Does it mean that the government is using the counterterrorism act or law to spy on Kenyans? Is that what the government is doing?
Who is supposed to be responding to that, Prof?
Yeah, I know you're speaking for the government. That's why I'm asking you that question. Is the government actually spying? Because, like I said, the government used the word criminals and terrorizing Kenyans. And I've told you the African state has been called upon to transform itself from being a developmental state to a fight or counter-terrorism state. So Kenya is fighting terrorism. So for the president to use criminals and terror in the same speech, raise the issue of terrorism. And I've told you, when you watch some of the protesters, you will see people in plain clothes going into the protesters and picking up 7 persons, which is more or less profiling. So what I want to know from you is that are you using your counter-terrorism surveillance law to spy on Kenyans? That is why you were able to profile some of these protesters and pick them out.
Well, today, the president speaking on X, formerly Twitter, has actually spoken to that issue. And when confronted on the use of the word criminals, he clearly said, I'm talking about a few hours ago, no, not even a few minutes ago, the X conversation I think is still ongoing. The president said that in referring to criminals, he had in mind the constitutional provisions that allow for demonstrations and picketing. In our constitution, that is Article 37. And he said that the people who banned the Chief Justice office on City Hall Way, those were not allows us, the Constitution allows anybody peaceably and unarmed. Once you get into arson, that is no longer a protected demonstrator. And by the way, the Constitution of Kenya 2010 speaks about protesters and people doing picketing. The drafters deliberately did not use the word protest because the word protest has got two sides to it. You can actually protest peacefully. Of course, the whole idea about protesting is to cause a little bit of inconvenience. But
hold
here,
on, Arnold, right? I'm not just using the word criminals. I did the same to the president when he was speaking on Twitter or X Space, right? I'm saying that his speech on June 26th, right? He used the word criminals terrorizing Kenya, right? Be careful of what he said. Criminals, right? I understand that criminals will take advantage of the Gen Z protest, which is understandable. But using the word terrorizing Kenyans, right? And I've told you the African states, right? Based on what happened in the United States, is being called upon to be countering terrorism. So that's what the African state is currently doing, right? So to use the word terrorizing Kenya raises the issue of what? Terrorism. And I'm saying that during the protest, you will see people in civilian clothes going into the protesters and picking certain individuals within the large protesters and putting them in the back of vehicles. So what I want to know is that it's something about profiling. So are you using your counter-terrorism law to profile on civilians to know who you refer to as criminals terrorizing Kenyans? It is not only criminals.
It's fine.
And terrorizing.
So, and he's actually spoken to that today. I'm just reporting to you what he has said a couple of minutes ago. He has said that once people banned the Chief Justice office, the people who banned Parliament, the people who banned the Nairobi Governor's office that is situated literally on the same street or adjacent street, that is City Hallway and Parliament Road, that once there is an arson, that is no longer a demonstration, that cannot be protected under our laws, and therefore that qualifies to be a criminal. As of the word terrorism.
Would you consider that to be a terrorist act?
Now, I actually was going to the terrorist bit of it.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Two, remember when these young people went to the street, provisions in the finance bill that they found not good. There was no finance bill in the office of the Chief Justice. There was no finance bill at the governor's office in Nairobi. Probably in Parliament, we could actually find ways of justifying that arson in Parliament. Probably Parliament is the people's house. So people had visited their own house to actually check on their representatives. They didn't like what they were doing. But for those who are looting supermarkets in Nairobi, for those who are looting shops in Nairobi, that had nothing. At that particular point, that ceases to become a protected demonstration, and it therefore then speaks to criminality to that end. As of the word terrorism, when you rain terror on people, there is the other bit of it. There's the anarchy, because what we saw outside of the good intentions by the young people, there were infiltrations, yes. That particular bit, there was a little bit of anarchy. But what do terrorists do? It's the same thing. They are same tactics. They do arson. They bring in anarchy. But you asked, did the state use the counterterrorism laws? No. We have seen police officers, of course, and here we have got a specialized unit, several specialized units that fight terrorism. None of them have been used so far in these particular demonstrations. We have got the ATPU. ATPU is the anti-terror police unit. Nowhere has it actually been seen anywhere in this particular demonstration. What we have seen are the Directorate of Criminal Intelligence Police, DCI. That particular group actually is a plainclothes unit that deals with crime. So it's easy for them to work around. I know a few Kenyans have actually sensationalized that, but in their daily lives, they know the MO, the modus operandi of that particular unit. That simply is out to combat, is an arm of the police. But so far, data protection, we have got very robust data protection laws. If the state were to employ the counterterrorism infrastructure that we have in this country, and it's quite a progressive one, quite a hardy one, seeing that we've been fighting Al-Shabaab for the last 15 years. That was not seen anywhere. Of course, there is the concern of overreach by the state. But at the point when the president spoke about that, he spoke about the people who had infiltrated the demonstrators and were not doing. It will be important for me to say this, that for the first time, I have organized demonstrations myself. I did that so many years ago, and I think I have said this on television that probably I am among the few people who have had a demonstration that got to the gates of State House. I did that in 2011. It's reported and it's out there, but with a smaller team. But this is the point, that for the first time, I have seen demonstrators who are so behaved. Before the infiltration, the Gen Z demonstrations were focused, singular, and very, very disciplined. They had gone to the street for one issue, and that was the finance bill. Later on, as usual, and I have seen this over the years I've actually lived, that once there are demonstrations, criminals have always used that as a cover to do other issues. And normally the burden, according to our constitution, is given to the organizers to ensure that when you organize a demonstration, you separate your people from the other people. But normally, the kind and the nature, the scale of the demonstrations in the streets of Nairobi was so huge. It covered several streets that the organizers were no longer in control. As of that particular point, the police were not able to do so much because it's literally all over the city. Plus, we have got a lean police unit that has to take care of a very big country. So, and there weren't just demonstrations in Nairobi alone. And that is why we actually go to this particular level. But I do not think that the state has actually, from my experience, as a person who has worked, or rather, quote unquote, worked against the state before, and now working with the state or for the state, I have not seen them employ the type of strong hand I've seen in the past. Suffice to say, and I know this is it borders on being a little bit insensitive, but suffice to say that the type of police posture, the posture the police took this time round, was softer than the posture of the police I met 10 years ago when I was organizing young people in the streets of Nairobi. This was a little bit softer because partly we have got a new constitution. Secondly, because we had a group that was actually well organized and they really were trying to be within the law, as constitutional, as legal as possible.
Okay, all right. I'll explore what you just said more, but let me go to Mbia, right? Now, that there is currently who are demonstrating against the government and making certain demands. We know that there is more or less a division between them, right? Where some people are taking advantage, right, of what is currently happening. Are you aware of what is currently happening? That certain group of people within the Gen Z are taking opportunity of what is going on, and this has led to a lot of disinformation within their ranks.
I think I just lost you for a minute, but I'll just comment on what Maliba said. I wanted to respond on that. It's actually in line, in order. We do have a Data Protection Act, 2019. So the act is 5 years old. And for me there, I'd want to highlight two things that were critical over the past 3 weeks, to just mention it for context. One, there was a breach on the right to privacy. Yeah, that did happen. There was interception and surveillance. And this is how then they were able to target the youths and then map them out, and especially even for the snipers that we saw. So that precision of, counter attack in terms of the,
But wait, hold on. Are you saying that as a fact? Because I have made my statement that what I saw on the screen, right? And I'm looking at it within the context of the counterterrorism law, right? So are you saying that as a fact? That you know that as a fact? Because I don't have any research to that, but I am making my submission based on what I see and quoting the law and quoting the president's speech.
Okay, so as a fact, even from the videos, if you have a look at them, Prof, you will see there were snipers. As a fact, you would see that there were plainclothes police, as you rightly stated. There were national security architecture that were out there in terms of just protecting and getting as much information as they could, especially the NIS. So what I wanted to highlight based on what Maliba mentioned on the Data Protection Act, which is now 5 years old, is that we have gaps in this act. And I'll just mention one so that I can go back to the question you asked me, is the gaps in the legal framework. So the lack of the financial independence, the oversight independence, that's why the issue, whenever an issue on national security is flagged, it becomes very hard to oversight and mention it, because then issues on interception, issues on surveillance, issues on right to privacy, breaches that are done under the right to privacy are then hard to justify, because as it is, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner has released guidance notes. And there's a guidance note on telecommunications, there's a guidance note on health, and communications, but there's no guidance note on security. Last month, we had a meeting with the Data Protection Commissioner herself. It's a lady in Kenya. And we asked her, elections are coming up in 2027. And you know, in the Kenyan context, voting, or rather, sorry, not voting, campaigning, and especially sensitization starts 2 years prior. So you were asking her, what measures have you put in place this time for you to ensure that we are able to fill up the gaps that were from the previous election, especially on national security?
Hold on for a second, right? Dr. Nyemba will be leaving at 5:30. So let me get Arnold to respond to what you just said. So that when Dr. Nyemba leaves, I will engage the two of you. So Arnold, respond to what she just said, because like I'm saying, right, using the word criminals and terror at the same time, right, goes into the argument that I'm making, that the state is being called upon to fight terrorism. So you are going to take advantage of any situation in terms of the terrorism law or in terms of the Data Protection Act to violate the rights, right? Since it is terrorism, you have every justification, right, to use terrorism as an excuse to surveil or to invade the privacy of citizens. Would you agree with what Mbaya is saying, that the government has been able to engage in such activities?
I cannot, as a fact, confirm that I know that really the police used that particular framework to violate any rights, specifically rights to privacy. Because literally, how do the police work? Here, we have got an issue of national concern. We have got individuals. And by the way, the presence of the alleged snipers has not been proven. And then when a sniper, even from an operational perspective, not operational, let's talk about from a tactical perspective, how then can you tell that the person, as the alleged sniper used, actually was targeting somebody because they already had prior data on them? That is a little bit is a tall one. You are stretching that. But then let's speak about how the police would work, especially in reaching out to the people they thought were responsible for crime. There are people that were arrested in the streets. We have got lots of that. And that was so straight. You are arrested, you tell us who gave you money, and then we reach out to them. The other bit of it, I'm just trying to wonder, when the police are trying to actually unravel something, they've got access to our data. And, you know, those are some of the confessions we don't want to speak about loudly, because you cannot get coherent when speaking about how security works. Because a lot of times, how you fight insecurity sometimes feels like you have to go a little bit extra constitutional. Because if you have to check out, if I have a suspicion on somebody, the truth is that ordinarily the police have to get a court order. That's how we do it, how it's supposed to be done in Kenya. But by the time you get a police order, you are doing what the people in the security world would call tingling the wires, because then somebody could actually easily know that they are being targeted. that somebody somewhere is actually listening to their conversation, or somebody is going into their data. So for now, of course, activists are a little bit sensitive with the issue, with claims that the government surveilled on them. But I'm trying to think, how would
I know the government doing that would not be out of, it wouldn't be anything extraordinary. You remember in the United States, we had a Patriot Act, and Edward Snowden told the whole world that the US government has been what? Snitching on what? Or listening to the conversations of Americans. So the government doing that would not be anything out of the ordinary. And I wouldn't be surprised the government of Kenya is doing that. Because even the US government, which talks about privacy, is engaged in such activities.
But you see, Prof, look at this. There are so many Kenyans who are communicating. That is a huge group, or rather, that's a bulk of data. You are not able practically to listen to everybody. There must be some level of reasonable suspicion as to why then you can actually single out an individual for purposes of then trying to check out if there's anything to pursue legally. Then after that, you have to go the legal way.
Basically, you're confirming what I'm saying, that the government probably is listening to certain individuals who they suspect to be criminals and engage in terrorist acts. Are you confirming that?
I cannot confirm or deny.
No, but I want you are here to speak on record. Based on your own analysis and what you are saying.
That's why I'm saying.
Those individuals who were picked up, right, who were profiled and picked up and taken to the back of the trucks, right? Either they were profiled or they were surveilled on as being threats to the state, and they were picked up. Like I said, we have the Patriot Act in the US, but even Edward Snowden said the US government was listening to American citizens. So that would be nothing out of ordinary for the Kenyan government to be doing.
There is no evidence that the people who were picked up from an information-led operation that snooped on them. Most of them were picked out because probably they are
all right, so while we are waiting, whilst we are waiting for you, I'll have more time.
I'm saying, I am saying that there is no evidence that those that were picked were because of police having snooped on them. But a lot of the people who have been picked were literally picked because of their activity. You will see it online. That was overt. It wasn't a covert operation. Probably people who guided others in shops to loot, in places where they could actually get weapons, people who spoke to the fact that this is how you can actually terrorize. Those were overt. It was, let me say, you don't need to go the SIGINT way. This was open source intelligence, where the police can, even individuals will tell, so-and-so is being picked because of this, but not because anyone had been snooped on. Up to that extent, I do not think that we are yet there. There is no evidence as yet. Most of them, the people picked is because of what they said publicly.
Okay, let me go to Dr. Nyamba, right? So I sent another narrative, right, where I just want to read it briefly and you can respond to that. On July 27, 2023, Warren Thompson, a financial journalist of the London-based Finance Uncovered, in an article titled From Debt to Death on the Street, Just How Big is African Loan Crisis, reported that data from Trading Economics and the IMF shows that at the end of December 2022, Kenya's debt to GDP ratio was estimated at 67%. The author reports further stating Kenya's problem dates back to 2014, in the early days of President Uhuru Kenyatta's administration, when the government decided to source half of its annual borrowing requirement from foreign lenders and began issuing Eurobonds. Right. Now, with the report that you presented or the research that you conducted, you said, well, with constrained access to concessional loans, commercial debt is being used to support government budget and finance infrastructure development. Why is government constrained? Why is government constrained to concessional loans and we are using commercial debt to support government budget? What could be the reason why? Can you explain that to our listeners? Why is Kenya constrained in terms of concessional loans and we are using commercial loans to service to finance our infrastructure budgets?
Thank you, Prof. Now, in the context of the planning and budgeting, we normally get to know how much is going to be spent in a year, and more likely even, especially once it comes to development, what is going to be allocated. But you have already seen that in terms of our expenditure, and more so the recurrent expenditure, based on the fact that a huge amount actually goes to the refinancing our interest on the debts that we have acquired, then we normally have nothing allocated on the development. So it has come to a point whereby now any president in place, I think this one started with President Kibaki, when he decided not to go to China and do not now the budget support, but to do what we call the project finance borrowing. The main problem that comes with that is that most of the expenditure or the projects that get financed in that manner is what we may call the government-to-government agreement. So now what happens is that the agreement is normally not well thought about, leave alone even the project alone. The project is supposed to go through the process of appraisal, comparison, and to an extent whereby prioritization is done before it is then required. If you read our Public Finance Management Act, requires that any expenditure, especially capital expenditure, needs to go through the appraisal process. The one that is financed through government or project support, normally, and most of them do not. They are only cited somewhere, maybe as a way of thinking. Like, for example, we have a road that was done here in Kenya, which we are calling expressway. If you look at the total amount, which is about 70 billion Kenya shillings, that amount, if appraisal went through, I'm sure, and from my understanding about the project management, would actually have resulted probably into another project that, and most likely that would have dealt with the problem of traffic in the city. Rather than just having one road, which normally nowadays we are calling it a rich man road. It's just used by a few people, despite the fact that it has issues. It is a PPP project, and along the way, you find that it is also able to acquire or is capturing part of the budget in the process. So now the process of going to a borrower, and an agreement is done between a government and a government, then that other government then decides. In fact, our country does not receive money, or the borrowing country does not receive money. It normally now receives the project after it has been completed. So all the materials, the labor, at times even soil itself is imported. You find that then the process itself becomes so messy, and it becomes the consequence of the problem of public debt, because now you are left with the debt. No money came. Of course, some of the problem I was talking about actually emanate from that aspect of having every manner of goods being brought into the country. Like, for example, Kenya is one. It has a number of companies that produce cement, but the cement that is used to make roads, especially through this kind of project financing, it is totally imported from China. So you see now it becomes an issue of acquiring a debt, which if it was well thought, and especially through the process of of course, described or prescribed under the PFMA, then you would see that you can avoid such an expenditure, incurring such debt, which then put you into the mess we are in. And I want to say that normally when our government is campaigning, and here I'm saying even the other previous government, there are those good promises. And, we get carried into those good promises. And I think this is why even our current president has really received a lot of wrath from the public based on the fact that there were a lot of hopes. There was also frustrations even in the previous government. And our current president gave us a lot of hopes, and we then gave him our trust. Within the time he came, he brought in, I would actually say this without contradiction, that his entire team he works with is that team that makes sure that you continue importing. There are people benefiting from the imports that you are having. There are people that are importing by that subsidization of the import. There are people who, like I have a case where our institution was able to discover one of the item that is heavily used in the hospital. That is the one that is used for breathing. I'm forgetting the name. It was very common during COVID. It was discovered here heavily in Kenya by a number of organizations, including higher learning institutions. But none has ever been licensed to supply to date, 3 years down the line. And those items continues to get imported. Who is benefiting? Follow keenly is a person in the government, is a person that's supposed to make the policy. Now, these people get there, like, for example, and they're here, I would say, even if you said we don't talk politics, a number of people that are in government currently were those that were suffered under the previous regime. But now they have now start plenty now to oppress those now that are outside the government, enriching themselves. And that the frustrations that we do have, Prof, and of course, the cost that Kenya cannot produce anything, including toothpicks. We used to produce toothpicks when I was very young, tissue papers. Everything now has to come from out. How do you expect us to pay? We are not exporting. We are not producing dollar. We are not even in any way bringing quota into the economy, the amount of dollars that we require even to pay for our importations. Leave alone even to fund now what we are calling the infrastructural requirement. Of course, there are areas like roads we require. Some of the items can actually be sourced within. Others has to come from out. But we have to be very keen that we exploit our resources, not depending fully on everything that is coming from outside, whether it is on the project or whether it's for just direct consumption.
Right. Thank you, Doc, very much. Right. Let me come to you, Arnold. Right. Given the submission of Doc just made in terms of the structural challenges of the Kenyan economy, that it is import dependent, right? We've known that for a long time. Then the president keep making promises upon promises based on its agenda about the things that he needs to do, knowing very well that these are the challenges. We know there are sectional interests, right, in the Kenyan economy or every African economy, right? Sectional interest or ethnic interest. Right? We know all these things are happening. Now, if you look at the report that I sent to you, right, the report gave conclusions or recommendations, and they said there shouldn't be any sort of taxation because Kenyans are already overburdened with taxation. They suggested reducing expenditure, closing the gaps in government in terms of corruption. These are some of the recommendations that they made, but the government still did not listen, right? The government still, with the finance bill, went ahead in terms of taxation, right? The president has been named Zacchaeus. Right. I listened to him and they called him Zacchaeus. Is your president a tax man, as Lucky Dube said, who is only interested in taxation rather than reducing expenditure and closing loopholes to fight corruption? Arnold,
Prof,
I'm listening to you. Yeah.
My internet little bit went down and I lost most of the last part of what you were asking. So I didn't get the question substantively.
Okay, let me go back, right? If you listen to Doc carefully, he talked about the structural challenges of the Kenyan economy, being it is import dependent, right? Most of the goods are coming from overseas, right? So in their research, they gave what recommendations on things that the government can do. Government should reduce its expenditure. Government should close gaps within the revenue. We know there are sectional interests and ethnic interests whenever a government comes to place. If you look at what they said, right, it's the people in government who have formed companies and they are getting contracts. So basically, they control everything, which is the sectional interest. So what the recommendation was, cut down on your expenditure, try as much as possible to reduce corruption and illicit financial flows. But all these recommendations were made. The government didn't listen to it. With the finance bill, the government went ahead to do taxation. So the president is being referred to as Zacchaeus, right? Zacchaeus in the Bible, a tax man. If you listen to Lucky Dube, when he was with the music, a tax man, I want to know from you, is your government or your president only interested in taxation instead of doing the hard work to cut down expenditure and fight corruption? Is your president a tax man or is he a Zacchaeus?
My internet. Just to confirm if you can hear me now.
Okay, is your president only interested in taxing the Kenyans instead of reducing expenditure, which he has started doing now, and trying to fight those sectional interests, which are mostly engaged in corruption?
Doctor, there's something I'm going to put it on a confession. I spoke on it on national television 3 days before the president would show up and speak about the same. In the last 1 hour, he's also spoken about the same. You know, narratives are powerful when it comes to communication. Narratives are, you see, the difference between we human beings and other animals, if you allow me to a little bit of latitude, the difference between we human beings and other animals is that we human beings are storytelling animals, and that is where narratives come in. Now, the narrative that Kenyans are already overtaxed, if you looked at it qualitatively, it will make sense. Quantitatively, it doesn't. I say that because I have worked in the US for 3 years. I have also worked in Rwanda. I have worked in DRC. My last posting was in Somalia before I came back to the country to take up what I'm doing. And I've also worked in Afghanistan and Syria. The truth is that having worked elsewhere and looking at the tax regime around here, it is not exactly what it's being sold there. But then for purposes of political conversation, you know, the opposition in this country or people who are opposed to any particular process have got a right of freedom and therefore comes with freedom of narratives. The big problem we have here,
and the reason, right? Like I said, we do not engage in politics over here.
I'm actually building a point. It might look political, but because, and by the way, there's nothing entirely wrong with politics because politics is how we govern ourselves. Politics is serious business. That should never be frowned upon.
I'm using the word politics in the sense that it's going to be against the opposition.
No. I'm actually
to respond to anything you say.
I'm building a point. I wanted to respond to your question in an entirely in-depth way. The problem the government of Kenya is facing, including the Gen Z and what you would call the Swahili uprising or the Swahili spring.
We'll come to that. We'll come to the Swahili uprising. Go ahead.
The reason how we got here is two things: a failure in political communication and a little bit of what Professor Njaramba earlier on spoke about, bad manners, where those in power sometimes want to come off as lords over the others. And I would say this because I've confessed it before, and the president has spoken to it. There was a failure in communication because the government did not adequately counter other narratives with facts and evidence. The way they argue in the US that in God we trust, everybody else must bring data. The government took the aspect of communication lightly. And for reasons of having not taken communication seriously, and I'm talking about advocacy here, I'm talking about public communication, I'm talking about political communication, they allowed other narratives to actually take root. So by the time the finance bill protests were coming up, I will tell you as a matter of fact that the finance bill is not the reason as to why people went to the streets per se. That was just the trigger, but there were narratives that had built a lot of anger. When we talk about communication, we were telling people that we are in dire straits as a nation. We need to tighten our belt and everybody could contribute more. But then the people, including the young people, would ask, why are some ministers putting on watches that are worth tens of millions? One watch, one day, it's worth over 30 million Kenya shillings, for example. Why are people putting on a shoe that is worth about 1 million shillings, Kenya shillings, for example? So this government gets itself here not just because of the aspect, the issues that the people are, every time we do that thing called the critical factor analysis, a lot of times the reasons that actually are put forth on the first instance are normally not the real reasons. So when you do a so that, by the time you get to the fifth ask of so that, you get the real critical factor that actually causes an issue. And that is why I'm actually telling you that there is a different way of looking at how we arrived here. It was a failure in communication.
Hold on, Arnold, right. Let's go back to Dr. Njaramba, right? Like I said, their report made some recommendations, right? I'm going to read some of these things to you. You react, then you come back and recommend that. It's not just based on narratives. I'm saying the narratives are based on research. Now, this is what we find. Kenya should revert patent for more taxes. That was their recommendation. He said what? Tax Law Amendment Act, April 2020. He said what? 30% of electricity costs in Kenya in addition to the normal electricity expense disallowed. Exemption of interest earned on contribution paid to Deposit Protection Fund from tax discontinued. 100% reduced investment deduction rates from 150%. Expand the VAT base by removing the exclusion of excise duty and levies from taxable value of petroleum. 1% introduction of a minimum income tax payable by all companies of their gross turnover. So these are some of the recommendations that they made. Dr.
Prof, I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
To respond.
Prof, are you getting me? Can you hear me?
I'm talking to you. Some of the recommendations that you made in terms of what Kenya should reduce to reverse that pattern for more taxes.
Sorry. I think I'm losing what I think you are far away from the mic. Huh?
Okay, when you read page 7 of the report that I sent to you, right? The question I was asking Arnold, that the report gave us certain recommendations to avoid taxing the Kenyan people, and government should rather reduce its expenditure and close loopholes, right? So I'm giving him some of the recommendations that were in the report. And he said what? Tax Law Amendment Act, April 2020. There should be a 30% of electricity costs incurred in addition to the normal electricity expense disallowed. Exemption of interest earned on contribution paid to Deposit Protection fund from tax discontinue. So there were some suggestions that were made that they should be disallowed in terms of taxation, but rather the focus should be on government reducing its expenditure, closing what? Loopholes which has led to corruption and illicit financial flows. So I want you to bring us to up speed in terms of how government should avoid taxing people, taxing Kenyans, and the suggestion that you made in terms of what the government can do going forward.
Thank you, Prof. I have gotten you very well. And allow me to agree with Arnold. I think it should actually be very clear that the reason that there was the uprising may not simply, in fact, may not be even 40% be related to budget. It was accumulation of issues. In fact, we are Arnold has put it very well. We have some leaders that would even carry huge amount of money, and they are actually in the cabinet. Huge amount of money showing off to the people who are sleeping hungry. Now, to the question, I wanted to say that a government does not come to be sustained by the public. Rather, the government comes to facilitate the public to produce and thrive. And there is no government that has succeeded by killing its producers. And therefore, the element of the taxation and the recommendations supported by IMF simply is wrong. It is wrong. And I'm going to look at it in two ways. The first one, there is this narrative that Kenya in relatively is paying a very low tax. Actually, it's 13% of its GDP. Now, I have two issues based on that. One is that if you look at other countries that are paying high, you realize that there are other component of revenue that is considered, whereby Kenya government does not consider. One of it is what we call the tax expenditure. Most of the exemptions, most of tax incentives given to a number of individuals, it is supposed to be captured as money that was raised. However, it was spent at the source, just the way we do A&A. So it's supposed to be captured as part of revenue. If you do that, you'll have an addition of over 500 billion Kenya shilling on top of the revenue we receive. That is one. Number two is the element of the denominator in this equation, which is GDP. Kenya GDP currently is reading around 15 trillion Kenya shillings. 15 trillion Kenya shillings. If you look at the components of what comprises that GDP, you'll see above 40% of that simply comprises the informal sector. And a question that I will always ask, how did the data from informal sector get to be captured? And then it is hard to tax them. So you realize that if from 15 trillion, you remove 40%, then you are having about 10 trillion. So if you do your math, you will see that Kenya public pays 28% tax in the ratio of GDP. 28%. So this 13%, it is not true. Otherwise, the GDP itself in Kenya, we are still in question how that data. In fact, at one point, in fact, I normally say that at one point, Kenya recorded a negative growth rate during COVID. However, its GDP in real value increased by 3 trillion. It was a pure miracle how that happened. Now, the other issues when it comes to taxation, Prof, is that the taxation, the direction we have seen being taken, especially now by the current regime, is that anywhere where revenue can be squeezed, anywhere, whether you leave the entity being taxed dying, that tax must be collected. That is simply being punitive to your producer, to your consumer. And then again, the aspect of what we call demand, aggregate demand in an economy. The moment, even if you do not kill the producer and they produce, but the people that consume are continuously being diminished, who is going to buy? You are simply killing indirectly the industries. And therefore, you realize that it was not making sense that raising of revenue by simply squeezing everything possible from a consumer. And you see now it was not possible to so many other than direct producers, the formal producers and the employees. So the issue was rain heavily on pay as you earn and also directly from the producer. So you are killing the two, and the two in any given economy are the sustainers and of course the enabler of any growth. So the policy and the direction that our government had taken, it was simply beating any logic. What is the aim in the long run? Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
Allow me to shift to another group, kindly. I'll be shifting out.
Sure. All right. So, like I said, time is fast spent. Let me come to Arnold, right? I think this is going to be your last respondent. We'll get a close remark. So some of the recommendations was government to cut down its expenditure and stop this opulence lifestyle and corruption, right? If you listen to the president, just a couple of days, he's made some suggestions in terms of 47 state corporations with overlapping duplicating functions, right, to be dissolved, advisors to be reduced, and other things. So the government is taking steps. Is it just rhetoric, or these things are going to be actionable in Parliament? Because narratives or saying something itself is not policy. Can you promise the Gen Z, right? I'll come to that very soon. Can you promise that the government is going to translate the narratives or this rhetoric into actionable policy?
At about 1:30 p.m. East African time today, the president issued an elaborate statement in which he made directions now in policy as required in law that the president, any presidential declaration or decree has to be in written and with a seal. He issued directions that substantively cut on the budget. He cut his budget by 50%. He cut that of the deputy president, the prime minister. He did away with budgets such as those that brought down what I would call charity, the first lady and the second lady, all of them removed. He's done almost 20%, or rather 20 of the asks that the Gen Zs had done. He has put it in writing today. Before he went to engage young people on X, he actually put out and even said that he will shortly be reorganizing government. So if you know, or rather if you understand the impact of what the demonstrations by young people has actually done, you look at government policy going forward. We've recalled the finance bill. It's that particular effect is now, there's a domino effect. Even counties are now readjusting that. We've cut down on government expenditure. Now only necessary travels will be out there. Government has stopped any buying of new vehicles except for the security department. It has been suspended for the next 12 months. The same has actually been done for any other new offices that were being created, including what young people said, the illegal cabinet administrative secretary positions. Actually, in law, the courts had already allowed the president to actually go ahead and do it before he went to the US. but somehow he already had read the mood of the country and did not. Before he went to the US, it was expected that he would actually appoint the CASs, or rather the Cabinet Administrative Secretaries, which is an equivalent to an assistant minister. That he didn't do, because already the national mood did not support the legalists that had actually brought them into office. So the president has and is actually committed to meeting a lot of the demands by young people in the administration of public management, because the president himself says that he's aligned with a lot of what they're asking. He says we should cut unnecessary expenditure, because at the same time, a person who is struggling to pay debt, a person who is struggling to get by, should not be living luxuriously the way some of our leaders have been. Actually, he has ordered that there shall be no public or civil servant, a public officer or a civil servant or a state officer, to participate in, we call them harambes here. Those are public fundraisings. It has been disallowed, and he has actually given the Attorney General 21 days to come up with the legislation going forward that will bar now in law that no public officer will be part and parcel of fundraisers, because those fundraisers are actually motivators to corruption. Because where do they get the monies? They actually show up with them in fundraising events. That is a question everybody will be asking, because we live in the same country. The economy is struggling. How then is it that only leaders show up with money in bags for charity, so that then they are loved, and they use that, of course, as a campaign gimmick? So that has actually been done away with. And I think that is actually going to inject dignity and hygiene in our politics, because somehow our politics has been that it doesn't matter how you make your money doesn't really count. But if you bring that money into politics, you win a seat and then you become a honorable. That is going to change going forward.
All right, thank you very much. Right, so let me get your closing remarks in Bayer. Listening to the conversation, listening to the economic challenges, the structural challenges that the economy is facing, right, and the Gen Z demands, right? Would you, and listening to the president, are you guys now beginning to understand the situation of the country, and you would like to have a compromise where some of these things will be resolved? I want your final response on that. Then we can close for the program today.
Okay, so one, I really wish my Maliba would be here to hear my last point, but I'll make sure he hears it. But this is what I'd want to say, that lives have been lost, unfortunately. And lots of property has been destroyed. And there's so many who've been wounded, injured, and attacked by the extrajudicial killings and the excessive use of force by the police. So does that equate to a very reasonable statement like cutting off, reducing the wage bill, reducing unnecessary spending? Did it take lives to be lost for the president to come to his realization that his house is on fire? It just shows you that even the people around him masquerading as his advisors, nobody's telling the king that he's naked, So for me, it's really too little, like a carrot stick stuff, for you to flag and say that, yes, he's done this, but all the things that he's done is something that cannot even equate to a limb being lost, leave alone a life. So that I wanted to...
I thank you for that. Yeah, I'm trying to arrange for a third part, right, where we're going to invite Kipra and IEA. So when they come, we'll have the time to delve into this conversation. But anyway, let me thank you so much, right, for coming to the program. And you are welcome anytime. Next week, if you are able to get the IE and the Kipra together, I'll send an invitation to you for you to come so that we'll look at some of these things in terms of the debt and what the government is proposing, right? So on this note, we come to the end of another edition of Sankofa African series. My name is Dr. Benjamin Akwe. We're lucky to have in Beya, Dr. Nyaramba and Maliba from the government. So see you next week, Friday, or July 12th, as we have a part 3 of the Kenyan situation. On this note, I said, enjoy your weekend from New York.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ban. Thank you.